This podcast contains sexually oriented content and may not be suitable for young listeners. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm super excited for this week's episode because we're going to continue with the theme of dating. Last week, you guys sent in the dating horror stories, and I read several of them, and they were hilarious. I will never, ever, 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 ever get over the person who wiped their butt with someone else's, paper towel in their kitchen and smelled it and then threw it in the garbage. Oh my God, disgusting. And like I said, yeah, if you missed that episode, it was last week's. You won't be disappointed. Go listen to it. But this week I want to kind of do something a little different. I want to share my own dating experience, but not my dating horror stories. I actually want to talk about how I went from waiting until marriage to have my first kiss. Yep, you heard that correctly. I was going to wait until marriage to have my first kiss. I'm going to share all of that. And then I want to share how I went from that to essentially having a fulfilling sex life without a ring on my finger. Now, okay, I do have a couple disclaimers for this episode. And the first is that I'm not an expert or a sexologist in sex, relationships, dating, whatever. I have worked with my therapist and read quite a number of books about dating. So I know what works for me, but it honestly might not work for you. My advice is to take what resonates, and if something I say doesn't seem like a good fit for you, just take it with a grain of salt. And the second disclaimer is that I have no issue with Christians wanting to live their life in the best way they see fit. However, I will be talking about my experience as a fundamentalist Christian, which essentially just means that I took the Bible literally, word for word. And I will be talking about my experiences in purity culture. And purity culture is this whole big thing that could have its own episode, but essentially it really focuses on a woman's purity and not having sex or being touched by a man before marriage, because there's this notion that she becomes less and less desirable and less worthy, and that's just really shitty. So you can look up purity culture for yourself, but that's essentially what it is. And I also want to go through the teachings of the church and how I went from believing really incredibly harmful ideas for dating life to, again, educating myself on really helpful topics and how I learned how to pick a proper partner. So again, listener discretion is advised, but I'm your host, Alexandria, and this is the Big Heart, Big Booty podcast. Now you might be thinking, what is the difference between Christian dating and non-religious dating? Isn't it the same? You find someone you're compatible with and then build a life together, right? Wrong. It's just wrong. You're wrong. You're dumb. You're stupid. You don't just find somebody to love. You just don't find somebody who you're compatible with. Nope. Wrong. To understand Christian dating, you need to understand that the church's worldview is that they are not supposed to be anything like the world. They're not supposed to be anything like non-religious people because, well, Christ is the one who's supposed to shine his light through you, whatever the fuck that means. And your life is supposed to look different from other people. This is the proof that you're living by God's lead. So the church takes it upon themselves to teach about dating and marriage and sex without having the facts. But before we get into that, let's review some of the ideas I was taught about dating back as a Bible thumper, because if you walk into a church and stay long enough, you're definitely going to hear a sermon about biblical dating and biblical God-honoring marriage. And what does biblical dating look like? What does that look like? Well, in layman's terms, it essentially looks like courtship. You know, the man is responsible for wooing the woman, and there needs to be clear boundaries for a blossoming relationship. No sex, no foreplay, no makeout sessions, only side hugs. Yep, that's a real thing. Only side hugs. And I was taught that you're never supposed to be alone with your significant other because people lack self-control. You're just going to mount on top of him and hump him until the cows come home, which leads to sex before marriage. And we all know that'll send you to the pit of hell. Or at the very least, it'll bond you with the person for life and make a woman less desirable because she is no longer the social construct known as a virgin. You're not allowed to masturbate because that's self-gratifying. And you're not supposed to be selfish at all. Sex isn't about you. It's about your partner. It's about the man. At least that's what they tell the women. And I have a sneaky suspicion that they're kind of giving men different advice. Well, something else that they told women is that you can't look at someone attractive. And I know that they told men this too. You can't look at someone attractive and think naughty thoughts because that's bad. And honestly, do I even need to mention that porn is off limits at all times? Despite God literally being present whenever his people have sex, according to the Bible. Isn't that just God watching porn? Yeah, that's gross, actually. Ew. Now, okay. Obviously, you can hear the sarcasm in my voice and hitting on different points. But seriously, people say that these Christian values lead to happy, long-lasting, monogamous relationships. Well, okay, except for the women who are being open and vulnerable about how they don't orgasm. It has been said, and I have this is all anecdotal, but I have definitely heard a lot of stories, and it seems like once married, people realize that the sexual compatibility is not there. Their spouse may have different ideas about sex and how often it should occur and what's its purpose in practice. Because everything is always different in theory. Like, no amount of premarital counseling can prepare a person or a couple for the very real possibility that they don't have the same values when it comes to sex, because this counseling is often done biblically by pastors or elders who are not qualified to teach about reproductive organs, biology, or sex systems. And actually, now that I think about it, the church that I went to quite frequently spoke about sex, but barely about consent. I mean, it would make sense why there was a convicted sex offender attending every Sunday, despite a previous church being the exact place where the person preyed upon their victims. Like, the lack of protection for young people in the church is actually disgusting, and church leaders need to do better, but that's a whole nother podcast. Back to what I was saying. As a previous church member, I learned about how two people having sex makes them one flesh, or basically one person. And I learned about the evils of masturbation and pornography, but never knew the clitoris had 8,000 nerve endings and its sole purpose is pleasure. Weird. It's almost like if your wife isn't orgasming, seems kind of purposeful, because 8,000 nerve endings, quite a lot. Take your time down there, buddy, okay? It's important that you do that. I hope you can hear the extremism in the Christian ideas and the lack of scientific and psychological research. Sure, sex can bond people, but research does not suggest that you lose your bodily autonomy and literally become one person with your partner. Porn can be harmful to people in a multitude of ways, but consenting adults recording their sexual behavior and then posting it for people to watch, honey, that's not sinful. That's called voyeurism. It's a kink, and it can be really fun as long as everyone's consenting. Premarital counseling can be a useful tool to navigate the transition from dating to marriage, but it cannot cultivate sexual compatibility. Exploring your body is also not sinful. It's actually really healthy. And to know how to pleasure yourself is to know how to advocate for yourself in the bedroom, and even be open to exploring your partner's body to know how to pleasure them. But I fell trapped to all the teachings of the church because I trusted the leaders and I trusted what they were saying. I trusted them when they told me that I needed to cover up my body because men can't control their urges. I trusted them when they taught me that hugging can cause lust and boners. Yeah, somebody told me that. I trusted them when they said that if I were alone with the person that I was dating, I had no self-control. And I believed them when they said Satan whispers in your ear and tempts you to watch porn and tempts you to masturbate because he hates God and he wants you to perish. And I believed the best practice to avoiding all of this so-called sinful behavior was to wait until marriage to have my first kiss and read books by other pastors who also were not qualified to touch on topics of dating or sex. And they were actively spreading factually incorrect information and calling it God's good plan. When I left the church, I had quite a bit of unlearning to do. I felt like I was on my own, but luckily we have technology and there are countless of resources for people to find. Like, I found Shan Boody and YouTube and binged pretty much every single one of her videos because I felt like I had found a gold mine. She clearly knew what she was talking about. She was an expert. She's absolutely beautiful and has an awesome sex life, at least from what she was saying. And I realized that I aligned with her values and I appreciated her unique education style. And she was just so impressive with all of her knowledge on dating and sex that it helped me overcome indoctrination. And I think all along I knew that I was suppressing my humanity by suppressing my sexuality. And to say that as a straight person kind of sounds weird because being straight in the church is the standard, but also at the same time realizing that I'm a sexual being and it's important for me and I have a pretty high sex drive, so to suppress myself and not ever have sex and not ever kiss anyone or just even like physically touch another person was harmful for my mental health. So I can't even imagine how horrific it is for people who not only suppress their sexuality, but also suppress their sexual identity. Because we know the church teaches that essentially the LGBTQ plus community just isn't valid and it's not a way to live. And I'll touch on that a little bit later, but essentially this suppression for me felt like I was walking uphill with 500 pounds of rocks tied to my ankles. And I had to take those rocks, or those bad ideas, and replace them with pieces of paper or good ideas that held the truth and were so less heavy to carry. I think one thing that I live my life by now is that if something's heavy to carry, it might just be heavy because it's heavy, or it might be heavy because it's going against the truth. It's going against my humanity. But I'm really thankful for Shan and her many resources and also my therapist. Shout out to my therapist. That I can now say I'm exploring the beauty of female sexuality and I do that safely. And once I left the church, I actually knew how to protect myself and I practiced safe sex. I mean, I had to learn it, but how do we do this? We do this by getting STI tested regularly, especially if you have new partners. We use condoms and know that there is more than just hormonal birth control to prevent pregnancy. And I also know my options that if I am pregnant and I'm not ready for a family. I also now know what to look for in a partner. You know, I used to look for people who had kind of this like fierce, unapologetic, like extreme love for Christ. And now that I'm not a Christian, I realize I'm looking for someone that I'm sexually compatible with, that has a personality that meshes well with mine, and that we essentially want the same things out of life. Not because the pulpit told us that we should do this, 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 and this, but because we have made the decision as individuals to come together as partners. And yeah, I've learned a lot, and I've learned a lot of helpful things for myself. But I think the most important lesson that I have learned after leaving the church is that love is love. Two consenting adults, no matter how they identify, deserve to have a fulfilling life and deserve to have the love of their dreams. And the church likes to talk about the fruit they bear, but I dare the church to look at the fruit of their teaching about dating in the LGBTQ community because it's not good. And loving someone is not expecting them to change their entire identity when they start believing in God. That is hate disguised as love, and you're wrong. And you can fight and you can say that's not God's good plan, it's not God's purpose, but honestly, you have a mountain of homework to do to prove that your God is the one true God, and then to prove that the Bible is reliable and written by God, or at least inspired by Him. And then you also have to prove that homosexuality is a sin. Because there's conflicting evidence in Scripture. which is another reason why I walked away, because the Bible is contradicting. But yeah, expecting someone to change their identity when it's not harmful is hate disguised as love. It's controlling, it's manipulative, and again, you're wrong. And I'm so sorry that I was ever part of a community that finds its power in suppressing people. And to my LGBTQ plus friends, love is love, and I'm really sorry for the 6 years as a Christian I spent believing otherwise. I take full responsibility for believing those really bad ideas, and I take full responsibility for the harm that I caused. Because it's not an if. I know I caused harm to many people that I love, but I just also want to say I'm really grateful for the people who stayed in my life and advocated for LGBTQ plus friends and family, and who argued with me and who told me I was wrong. Because if you hadn't been in my life, I might still be a Christian, and I might still be spreading hate. And I'm really glad that I'm not. And I'm also sorry for honestly believing just really horrible ideas about dating in general. Like, I'm still unlearning, but I have such better ideas about dating. For example, I know my body, and I have so much more fun exploring my body and my partner's body because of the education that I have. And sex is so much fun. I mean, of course it's serious, and I won't just be doing it with anyone, but it's a great time. Come on, man. Come on, it's fun. I love it. I get to connect with other humans on such a deep level, and I get to take care of them, and they get to take care of me, and it's honestly, in my opinion, it's one of the greatest things that humans get to partake in. I mean, think about it. If you want, sex can multiply your family by having your own children or adopting. There's this deep sense of belonging and being seen when you have sex with someone you love. But even if it's just a one-time thing, touch is really important, and you're still benefiting from it as long as you take the necessary precautions to protect yourself. If someone is not being honest about their history, and they're not willing to get tested or have hard conversations that are sometimes required for intimate connection, I would say actually often required for intimate connection, that it is not, that's just not somebody that you want to be connecting with, period. I think you should be connecting with someone who allows for self-exploration. You want to know why? Because I learned that I have kinks and desires and fantasies that are only shared with people who can delicately hold them without judgment. One of my favorite life experiences is stepping into the unknown with someone and not judging them when they bring something personal or something that society deems as taboo to the table. I would have never been able to do this if I was still part of purity culture. This is so frustrating, but even when I was a Christian, I thought that oral sex was not an option for me or my partner. And now it's a given, it's absolute given. But I want you to remember that sexuality is incredibly personal, and it's also a journey. If you needed a reminder to be patient with yourself and work toward a gratifying sex life, this is it. Remember that you can believe whatever you want about sex and dating and relationships, but it does not make it truthful or helpful. And if you are part of the church and find purity culture to be as harmful as me, or as harmful as I do, proper grammar, I don't know, whichever one, therapy is always an option. And if you can't afford therapy, I understand there's kind of a mental health crisis right now, and there's it's hard to get an appointment and it's expensive, whatever. YouTube is also a great resource. And I will have some of my personal favorite books linked in the description below about dating, about sex, about leaving Christianity as well, because I think there are really helpful books about that. So check the description box. And in the description box, you can also find my email, which if you have questions or just want to share your story with someone, feel free to send me an email. I'm really grateful for the people who have trusted me with some really important information and really personal information. I've had several people come out to me, which is honestly, I think, one of my favorite things, because I love seeing people step into their authenticity and living a life that they can be proud of and look back on and have no regrets, who don't suppress themselves. I've really done a whole entire 180 since like 2018. So if you want to share or get anything off your chest, feel free. You are safe with me. There is no judgment. And unless you want me to share it, I will not. And to be honest, I think I kind of want to do this as a series on my channel, talking about overcoming purity culture, having healthy dating habits, just talking about dating. It's a fun topic. And so let me know if that's something you want by subscribing or liking this video. I think that's it for this week, though. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for letting me be vulnerable. Thank you for letting me explain a little bit more about my life, where I came from and where I'm going and where I am now. This is really fun for me. I really enjoy it, and I hope you enjoyed it too. But I'll catch you in next week's episode, and I hope you have a great fucking weekend, bitch. Let's go. Go have sex. Go. Bye.